We are continuing today in our story of Moses. And we're up to chapter 5 in Exodus, so we're kind of going to be whizzing through chapters 5 to 11. And we're not doing every verse in chapters 5 to 11. We're going to read some of it, and I'm going to tell some, and I'm going to summarise some, just simply because I want to get an overview of where the story's going. The big question is, who will the people follow in this story? Will it be Pharaoh or will it be God? That's the big choice. Who is the one who is worth being following? Who is the one who is the best leader? God or Pharaoh? Pharaoh or God? There is a picture that represents the Pharaoh, which is the king. Pharaoh is just the Egyptian word for king. Sitting on his throne there, he's got all kinds of attendants. And on the right down here, we've got two older gentlemen, aged 80 and 83. And Halia sorted this out for us. When was it? She sorted it out for me anyway. I was trying to work out. I thought Aaron was older than Moses, and she thought he was younger. And anyway, we've sorted it out because the Bible tells us quite clearly. At this point, Moses is 80 and his brother Aaron is 83. Right, so he had an older sister Miriam, then he had an older brother Aaron, and then Moses was the baby, and he was the one that the previous Pharaoh wanted to kill when he was wanting to kill all the baby boys. So now we're not in the situation where it's the same Pharaoh, but it's someone else that I'm sure Moses would have known as he was growing up. So I'm guessing this is somebody who Moses would have probably called uncle, something like that. And so here they are. God has told Moses that he has to go back to Egypt and he has to speak to the current Pharaoh, who doesn't seem to be any less cruel than the previous ones. And he and his brother Aaron, because Aaron's going with him to help him, remember, Moses said, I'm not real good with talking, God. God said, I'll help you, I'm sending your brother. You can speak to your brother and then your brother will do whatever you tell him to do, whether it's words or whether it's actions. So here they are, ready to see Pharaoh. And instead of you hearing my voice read this chapter, just for a change, we're going to hear somebody else's voice if the technology works. Let's see.
Afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness. Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. Then they said, The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Now let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues or with the sword. But the king of Egypt said, Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to your work. Then Pharaoh said, Look, the people of the land are now numerous, and you are stopping them from working. That same day Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and overseers in charge of the people. You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw, but require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They're lazy. This is why they are crying out, Let us go and sacrifice to our God. Make the work harder for the people so that they keep working and pay no attention to lies. Then the slave drivers and the overseers went out and said to the people, This is what Pharaoh says. I will not give you any more straw. Go and get your own straw wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced at all." So the people scattered all over Egypt to gather stubble to use for straw. The slave drivers kept pressing them, saying, "Complete your work required of you for each day, just as when you had straw." And Pharaoh's slave drivers beat the Israelite overseers they had appointed, demanding, "Why haven't you met your quota of bricks yesterday or today as before?" Then the Israelite overseers went and appealed to Pharaoh. "Why have you treated your servants this way? Your servants are given no straw, yet we are told, 'Make bricks.' Your servants are being beaten, but the fault is with your own people." Pharaoh said, "Lazy? That's what you are, lazy! That is why you keep saying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord.' Now get to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce your full quota of bricks." The Israelite overseers realized they were in trouble when they were told, "You are not to reduce the number of bricks required of you for each day." When they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron waiting to meet them. And they said, "May the Lord look on you and judge you. You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials and have put a sword in their hand to kill us." Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Why, Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all."
I'll ask you a question. You don't have to answer it out loud, of course. Have you ever felt like Moses felt when you're in a difficult, horrible situation? You feel like crying out to God and saying, "Look, God, you've only made it worse." Have you? But it's human. And God knows that. And that's not the end of the story. But you can see what happens to these people or any group of people when you're going through a really hard, oppressive time and you feel like you are stuck and you are caught under this heavy burden and you can't get out. That's not fair. You can be tempted to wonder, is God like that too? Will God treat me like that? I can remember momentarily thinking, is God like these people who are behaving in that horrible way? Would he act like that too? I know now he won't. But just for that moment, I wondered really, can he possibly be like that? Now we see the contrast here because the Pharaoh was obviously a very, very cruel man. He was jealous because all these people were becoming numerous, successful, they were doing well, multiplying, all the rest. He didn't want them to take over. But he also didn't want to lose them as a workforce because he wanted them to be his slaves. He wanted to be in control and whip them and beat them and therefore be in total control of them. Not to help them, not to save them, not to help them to flourish so that they could all do well together. But he wanted to beat them down into pulp. And that's how the people felt. And so that guy came to Moses and said, "See what's happened?" And Moses then went to God, the right place to go. And at least he turned his emotions towards God. "Oh Lord, why have you brought trouble upon this people? Then you send me? Is this why you sent me? Moses at this point can't make sense of what's going on. He thought that if God's going to rescue his people, it's just going to be whiz out. I wish it was so. We all wish it was so when somebody's in that sort of situation. But it's not the end of the story. We're going to look at the next chapter when we see God's answer in the first 8 verses. His answer to Moses. He doesn't rebuke him for getting all head up. He doesn't rebuke him for saying why in an angry way. He simply answers. Chapter 6, verses 1 to 8. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, because of God's mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country." That's going to happen because of God. God also said to Moses, "I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty, but by the name of the Lord I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant, my special agreement with them, to give them the land of Canaan, where they lived as aliens." That's, foreigners. "Moreover, I've heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant." In other words, God's listening. He knows. He's been hearing all the cries. He's seen what's happened. But he's saying to Moses, think back, remember what you know, not just in your own life, but in the lives of your ancestors that are all written down in the Bible, what would become the Bible. God has made himself known to these famous ancestors: Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. I'll go on from verse 6. "Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord." Strong words from a strong God who means every word that he says. And so someone, when I was looking for pictures on the internet, summarised all that by "I am" and "I will." I thought that was really good. I am the Lord, and I will get you out of the slavery, and I will give you a new land. And it's because he is the Lord that we can trust him now when he says, "I will do this." That is very strong, even though he knows that we may have up and down emotions along the way, so long as the emotions are not the last word. They're just kind of the blips along the way. But underneath, I want to be holding on to the "I am the Lord God," because he will do whatever he says. And if I'm allowed the liberty to share one little personal story, it is fairly personal. It concerns Stuart and me, and I have his permission to share it. It all starts when I was 11, when I became a Christian. I mean, it was this amazing weekend. Friday was the first time I heard at a children's camp about Jesus on the cross, dying for us and rising again and all of that. And that was the day I had a vision of Jesus. Saturday, I made my own full commitment to follow Jesus. And even though I knew that my parents were very, very likely to be very, very angry, that was a big thing. And I would have to tell it. So my biggest barrier was fear. And God said I had to let the fear go. I had to come to him completely. That was Saturday. Sunday night, God spoke to me in clear words. And I was expecting, I'd heard the story of Abraham, that God spoke to Abraham and Abraham spoke to God. But I knew that story. God spoke to Abraham. And so I got the idea that if you're a Christian, if you're in a relationship with God, God can speak to you. And so I didn't know any Christians, so I fully expected, well, this would happen at some stage and God somehow or other. I didn't understand how it would work. God spoke to me. And I didn't know what it was going to be about, but it was very clear. It was about marriage. I was 11. Not interested in boys. Boys were peculiar creatures out there, Didn't really know any or want to particularly. And I didn't even have any brothers, so I wasn't very educated about boys. So, but God said three things. Number one, I must marry a Christian. I'd only been a Christian like 2 minutes. So I didn't really know much and nobody told me about this. And it wasn't the pattern in my family or any of the people I knew. So I realised I'm in for a new journey about marriage. Here I am 11. I thought I kind of had a general sense, when you read books and you have stories in your mind going on. And what God was talking about was nothing like that. He said, number one, you have to marry a Christian. And I thought about it and I thought, well, yeah, that makes sense because you need to go in the same direction, you need to work together, etc. All right, yep, I'll go accept that one. Number two was not so easy for me to accept because he said, I will choose your husband. I thought, well, really the bottom line in marriage should be, I choose. Then I had to work out, okay, if God chooses, would he choose somebody that I would not want to choose? No, he wouldn't, because he knows me. He knows me better than anyone else. And so, reluctantly, and after a bit more time, I said yes to that. Okay, number three, he said, you have to pray for this boy every day. And I said, well, how? I don't know who he is. I don't know where he is. I don't know anything about him. He said, you must come to me every morning and I will tell you what to pray. Because he knows. That's how I learned to pray. Praying for him. He's had a big impact on my life. That's a long, long time ago. 11. I'm now 75. So he's been in my life longer than I've been in his life, if you know what I mean. But what I was going to say about this is that God also gave me some clues. And this is where the promise bit comes in. One clue was that there will be a time that is over a year when you'll not see him, and then you'll get engaged. So I thought that's not the normal way to do things. Nothing about this is normal. And so I figured, well, if God's in charge and if I'm going to be a Christian, I better go his way and better find out, that because, I'm having a total shift here because, when you're a child of 11, your parents are your guides, there are certain things I didn't trust, but, they tell you things about how you should do things. And my mother was already telling me about marriage. And God is telling me something different. And I had to go, yes, to God's new way. So that was one clue. Then there were other clues. I also got clues about what he looked like, the exact shape of his nose and things like that. So I'd recognise him because I said, I need to recognise the person you are choosing. He gave me those clues. I have witnesses, my Jewish friend, I told her, and she knows. My other friend, Jenny, she told me to. I told her to. Then, when I was 17, at school, at the end of the year, my German teacher was giving out pretty pictures of a German calendar, okay? You know, we'd finished the year, school year, and put your hand up if you want this picture. And I didn't put my hand up. Now, this is a child's story. You've got to recognise I was young. I didn't know how you're supposed to pray. Nobody told me those things. I didn't know what was good, whether what I was doing was right or wrong, good or bad. And so I said to God, could he please arrange that the teacher gives me the calendar page that contains my future husband's birthday? So she, at the end, because I hadn't put my hand up, she gave me a leftover page. And on that page there was a pretty picture and just 2 weeks. I thought, oh, that narrows it down a bit. It's not even a whole month. It's 2 weeks, all right. It's in March, second half of March. And so I kept that. These are little clues, little signs. And my heart was not to, I don't know what it was. It wasn't so much to be curious. It was simply to be obedient so that I didn't make a mistake. But these are signs, and there are others along the way too, but they're the two key ones. And when I met Stuart at university, I thought, goodness me, his face looks familiar. It's like I've seen it before, you know. And anyway, we soon became friends. We were friends. We never ever were girlfriend and boyfriend. We didn't do that. We just skipped from friends to being engaged, you know. But actually we were friends just all along. And we still are friends, actually. All these years later, 56 and a half years later, we're still friends. But when I met him, of course, I in due time, you know, mentioned birthdays. And so I heard his birthday, and I had to wait till I caught the 13-hour train trip down to Sydney and went to see and to find this calendar page. And there, Stuart's birthday is not only in the 2 weeks, but it's in red because it was Easter Sunday that year. So I thought, oh. And then I didn't see, he was supposed to come to the town where I was at university for his grandmother's funeral, and his parents were expecting him to come, and he didn't come. And that was less than the year. And so I thought it'd be interesting to see what happened. He didn't come. So the next time I saw him was over the year. And then he proposed marriage. That's it. Here we are. But they're just two signs that God gave me as a child when I was 11 and 17, simply because I wanted to be obedient. That's all. And I'm not saying that anybody else should do any of this the same way. It's not about that. It's simply, when I look back, I can just see, not only from the Word of God, which of course is the strongest, but I can also see through my life various things that God promised. And that's just one kind of example. And God, if God says something, and if it definitely is God, that's something we've got to check. He is faithful, and if he says, I will do this, or in this case there were conditions, I had to do my bit too. I had to do this praying for this unknown person. But God will do it. Because that's That's who we worship. That's who he is. He's not going to mess around, and he's not going to ever deceive us. And we see in the story of Pharaoh that he was very deceptive, but God will not be deceptive. He will not let us down. He doesn't mess around. If he says something, that's it. You can believe him. You can rely on him. And that's the God that we worship. Okay, next slide, please. Let's just look at this comparison in ways that God is not like Pharaoh. And I just want to mention that Pharaoh, we can probably think of various people we've met along the way in our lives. Some of them they might have been bosses at work, they might have been teachers even, they might have been parents, they could be spouses, they could be friends, they could be anybody that's in our life, who actually, when we compare it like this, have acted more like Pharaoh than like God. So Pharaoh, everything he does comes out of his own fears. He comes out as a big bully. He was a big bully. But how do bullies get into bullying? They're there because of fear. They bully because of fear. They don't know, and that's why they're in control of everything, so that nothing happens that they are not prepared for. They don't expect. They want to just keep everybody down there, so they can. Well, they think. It's all a fiction, but they think that they can get through life okay. They're harsh. Pharaoh was harsh. He wouldn't listen, and there were times when people came to him and said, "Come on, listen." The Israelite leaders came, and then later in the story, some of his own advisors even came to him and said, "You're doing something crazy here. Listen." No. And he was absolutely ruthless. Now, if you haven't met people in your life, I think most people have, then you've only got to switch the TV on or, listen to news in any other way you get, and you hear about leaders that are like that. That is not like God. There are a lot of people who became Christians or were taught about God, but when things get difficult, they do get scared that God, in the end, is like that. That happens over and over and over again. So what do? They ditch God, stupidly. He's the one they should be holding onto. But they ditch God, sadly. And they go off in their own way, and so they end up having themselves as their own God. And then they get into trouble, and they've got no one else to turn to until they actually come back to God. That happens over and over again. Happens a lot with young people. But where's God coming from? He tells them it comes from a heart of love. He's the one who's been listening. It's fatherly. He heard their cries. And those cries touched his heart. They made him sad. He's not a God who's unmoved and unfeeling. And he says, and he will do, he says, "I will save you. I will rescue you." There's a lot of words that mean the same thing. He says, "I will do it." Don't give up. I will do it. Now, there may be some things that people have to do along the way. And in that case, we need to be ready to be obedient to whatever that is. But God will do what we can't do. He will do it. That's the difference in the character between these two. There's another question in the difference between Pharaoh and God. Can we have the next one? Who is more powerful? Because Pharaoh poses himself as the great big bully. He's got all the cards. He's got all the power. And they're just small little people who can be trampled underfoot. That's the way it looks. But that's not the whole story. God says to Moses, he said, I want you to go to Aaron, with Aaron, to Pharaoh, and this is what I want you to do. Can we have the next slide, please? So, Moses has to ask Aaron to put that staff down. You remember God asked Moses, what's in your hand? And it was a staff. Throw it down on the ground. What does it become? Snake. What does he then say? Pick it up by the tail, and then it becomes a staff again. Okay? So he says to Aaron, okay, now you be the one that throws the staff down because the same thing's going to happen. He does that. And so he became a snake. And then these magicians came along and they, for some reason, I don't understand how they worked except by demonic powers. They threw staffs down, they became snakes too. Except that Aaron's staff, which is now a snake, gobbled up all the others. There's none of the rest of them left. And so that he could turn it back into a staff again. So you'd think that would impress Pharaoh. It should have. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened. And he didn't listen to them. So Moses has said, what our God is asking is that you let our people go into the desert 3 days and we'll go and sacrifice to our God. And he said, no. So then that triggered, next slide please, 10 plagues. They weren't done on the same day, not in the same week. I'm not sure exactly what the whole period of time was. But here they are here. They're in 3 groups of 3, and then there's the worst one at the very end. So the first one was blood. And that's when Moses told Aaron, okay, get the staff and just wave it over the waters. And what will happen? All the water turns into blood. How great is that? No water to drink. For people, or for cattle, or for anyone. You don't want that. And so then the other magicians came out and they thought they tried to do the same. And so the magicians had some power. Demonic powers these were. They had some power. They could do some of the tricks. And they could also, the next one was frogs. Well, where Pharaoh's told God is going to send frogs all over the land. Well, then the others came out and they made more frogs too. Well, then, that's great, isn't it? So you've got too many frogs to went through what Moses and Aaron are bringing, and then the others bring more frogs. And so they're in a worse situation and they didn't know how to get rid of the frogs. So that really wasn't a good idea. Now, after that, the other evil magicians, the magicians using evil powers, gave up because they couldn't do any more tricks. That's it. And so there's one with flies just down here, covering the land with flies everywhere, except where the Israelites lived. They didn't have any flies. So that was, horrible for everywhere else. But the Israelites didn't have the flies. So we're already up to 1, 2, 3, 4 plagues apart from that first bit with the stick and everything, the snakes. And it said that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. What does that mean? Does it mean that God is responsible for Pharaoh being a hard-hearted person? Because the way it reads in English, it sounds like that. It's a Hebrew expression. And it doesn't actually mean that God is responsible for that. But, if you get somebody who is really, really hard-hearted and bent on a particular path which is evil, it's wrong, and then they're faced with someone who is good and righteous and godly, how do they act? Do they soften? I think they go the other way. They become harder. So when a person is really, like hell-bent on evil, and you see in somebody who's gentle in front of them and who's kind to them, and you think that would soften them. You'd wish so, but it doesn't work. They go worse. If they're just a person who's made a mistake and they're not hell-bent on evil, then yes, they may turn around. But there's a lot of people who are very hard-hearted. And once they're in that hard-hearted position which they get themselves into, and good comes along, they go harder. That's just human nature, observable all over the place. That's what happened in each case, in every single one of these plagues. I know that the frogs one was a week after the blood one, and we're not told the exact times for all the others, the interval between them, but there was time between each one. And then when it came to locusts, Pharaoh got himself in this position where he was seeing all of these kind of miraculous events occurring that were way out of the league of what his own magicians could do. And he started to realise there's power in this God that the Israelites are talking about. And then you get some momentary, what appears to be repentance. He'd say, I have sinned. I really should let the people go to worship this great God who has caused all of this. Sounds good, doesn't it? It's great. But you need to see the action, not just hear the words. But what was the action? He said on that occasion, oh, well, I'll let some of you go. I'll let the men go, not the women and children. Well, the men won't go without their women and children. And then his heart was hardened again, and he wouldn't let them go anyway. So this is a repeated pattern. In the middle of this, he starts to ask Moses, can you please pray for us, Moses, because we're all suffering here under this. Moses said, okay, you set the time. When do you want me to pray? The Pharaoh would say, oh, tomorrow, please. Moses said, okay, I'll go away. Tomorrow I'll pray. It'll all be fixed tomorrow. And so it was. So he's seeing this repeated pattern. He's seeing that even though he was hard-hearted towards God, God was still showing mercy towards him and answering Moses' prayers. He was totally unmoved. Then there was darkness, 3 days in darkness. Except, of course, for where the Israelites lived, where there was light. This time he said, okay, I'll have the men and the women and children can go, but not your cattle and the sheep. They said, we need them for sacrifices. It wasn't going to work. His heart was hardened again. He'll let them go anyway. And number 10 is the worst one. This is the shocking one. This is the horrifying one. Where God says, now, because they have not, Pharaoh has not taken notice after 9 plagues, I will, around midnight, kill the eldest son of every person, every Egyptian family, right from the Pharaoh down to the slave girls. Even the cattle, their firstborn, or male, will die tonight. I'm not sure if he took any notice of it, but it happened. But we're going to see next week, not next week because Tristan's preaching from Ubina, which will be great, but the next time we're going to see what God did to really make sure they went. Because this is all giving Pharaoh every opportunity, but it was also displaying the power of who is the greatest, God, not Pharaoh. To make that really, really, really clear. Last slide. So what have we found? God wins in every way. God's character is trustworthy and loving. And God's power is the greatest. That's who we need to hold on to when it looks like other people win or are going to win, because they cannot in the end win against God. God will win and God will save. We can trust him. Thanks.